Welcome along to MSP Navigator, folks. We are recording now. Great to have you here. I've got two experts in the room. I feel extremely outnumbered today, especially on the topic that we're speaking about. It's all about finance and your MSP. Looking at your PSA with Chris and looking at your finances with Adam on the ledger. I'm scratching my head right now. We're talking before this. I don't even know what a ledger is. So I have something myself. It's a system called Fresh Service, but you know, all of these terminologies, I will be the one asking the dumb questions. So Adam, Chris, welcome to the show. Great to have you here. Where do we start with this topic?
Well, where's a good start? And I suppose the challenge I had as an owner of an MSP was seeing the wood for the trees, and you know, my sort of personality, or part of my personality, is definitely around liking to understand data and make decisions based on data rather than just guessing. And so, and maybe if anything, I'm a bit too much like that.
Can you give me an example? Like you mentioned before we start recording, there's like day-to-day situations, being able to make decisions on your business day to day based on the financial data.
Well, look, so the basic fundamental ones in any business are: how do you drive gross margin? How efficient and productive is your workforce at building revenue, which ultimately translates into profit, right? So your questions there have got to be: am I charging enough for my service? How efficient is my workforce? How efficient are my processes? You know, and then you're getting into all sorts of other questions, which is, you know, how much should I pay my engineers? You know, how do I structure my service team? How do I, you know, structure my charging rates? There's so many then, you know, variables and decisions you've got to make about it. But you can't start to make these decisions unless you've got that information in front of you. I think that's the key thing. But you know, what is difficult here is knowing where to look, knowing how to structure this stuff, and then, you know, over time, working out and building a picture of what actually is what is happening, and then you can start to make some changes on that.
Are there like some really big elements to this, like things that you must have that can help you start making these decisions? I mean, I can think of one example from a sales perspective, and that's why I used to do in my MSP most of the time. And the MSPs that I worked with was, how did I price what I'm quoting? That was like the biggest thing for me. And to tell you the truth, in the sales roles, I wasn't really thinking of it from a profitability point of view. I was more looking at what I could make from that client, particularly, you know, compared to what potentially my competitor or the incumbent MSP is making.
And I can, you know, just talking around that, Scott, you were asking about, you know, where to start and getting that information in. Well, you know, Adam alluded to this earlier on, is making sure that you have that information in front of you.
Okay.
And a lot of the time, well, that information needs to be entered into some kind of system somewhere, right? Either into an accounting tool or PSA or whatever the case might be. So, you know, and also understanding how much your engineers cost, because you need to know when the work is done, how much those engineers cost. And as Adam said, how profitable are they and how efficient are they? Ultimately, then you can look to see from a contract perspective, you know, how profitable are the contracts within your customers. So you've got to have that information somewhere, and a good place to put that, I'm just going to kind of start this conversation off, is a good place to put that is going to be into a PSA tool.
I knew you were going to say that, Chris.
Oh, well, you know, I could have said accounting tool. I could have said something else, but you know,
you just said ledger.
Yeah, ledger, or, you know, these words that you and I don't understand. But yeah, it's got to go into some kind of tool. And 90% of MSPs on the planet are using a PSA tool of some sort or another, and all of them are going to be able to capture this information. So things like burden rates. You know, how much do your engineers cost? You know, putting that information in, the cost of your products and services. So things like you're buying Microsoft 365 from wherever it is that you're buying it from, those costs need to be in the system as well, so that when you then looking at the profitability of those contracts, you're going to be able to, you know, very easily look at the revenue minus all of those costs, and that's going to give you the profitability.
And I think absolutely agree with that, and I think the PSA tool really comes to life if you can accurately populate it with your costs, you know, your licensing costs, your labor costs, and you know, keep that updated and as accurate as possible. I don't think it's very easy to do that. And actually, Chris, I'd be interested to hear more from you on smart ways of automating that, so that there's less work to do in terms of having accurate COGS or cost of goods sold in your PSA. And because for me, you know, your Xero, your QuickBooks, they're great tools for giving you the truth around your true P&L and your balance sheet, and they help you with a whole load of things. But actually, they fall short when you're starting to look at the details of, you know, pricing methodologies, efficiencies with your workforce, profitability of clients, because they don't have all the hours. They don't have all the hours details in there, and all the labor and everything in there. So so I think it's very much a case of getting the best out of both of these tools. But in many ways, I would lead with the PSA, and I'd really want to work hard at getting, you know, the costs in there. One thing we're working on, and we don't have it today, but one thing we're working on is having some kind of reconciliation report between the data in a PSA and in your ledger, so you can actually see where your PSA may be out from a COGS perspective. So that's something that hopefully could help with this. But what are your thoughts on that, Chris?
Yeah, great question. And actually, it is fairly easy to get the costs into the PSA tool. You know, most PSA tools and you're certainly the bigger ones, you know, they have the ability for you to enter in the internal costs of the engineer. So there's an area you go into in under the resources, you know, and you work out what that engineer's rate is by the hour, and you simply put that rate in. So then every time, you know, that rate changes, if you know, give them a pay rise, whatever the case might be, then it's just going in and manually updating those and changing those. So from a cost of the engineer's point of view, that's very easy to enter into, you know, all of the PSA tools. And a lot of the, you know, the costs of things like, you know, license costs, as you talked about, you know, 365, those kind of things. There's a lot of integration with companies out there. So, you know, I'm not going to mention all the names out here because there are a bunch of them, but they'll integrate into all the PSA tools and bring that information in. So they'll bring in not only the cost price, but the selling price, and keep those updated. So every time there's a change of a cost or a selling price within that vendor, then it automatically updates the cost of those.
I've seen that feature in one of the lesser known PSAs, and it pulls in all of the Microsoft CSP licenses for all of your
fills
clients.
The whole lot in. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's, you know, and that's brilliant, because then every time those prices change, the MSP doesn't have to then go and manually update all of that stuff. The only thing really that would manually have to change is going to be the cost of the engineer, which in most companies isn't going to change that frequently anyway. So even if it's once a year, or, you know, even, you know, once every 6 months, it's not hugely onerous to just go in and update that figure. So
I'm going to ask, I'm always thinking to myself right now, I'm like, why do we need 2 bits of software? Like, why is this just not all handled by the PSA? This is maybe a question for Adam, but
do you know what? That's a left field question. Well, I don't know, but maybe this is just, you know, purely historical, and maybe the
fresh service, whatever.
Well, but maybe
if all the data is already there in your PSA, as Chris is saying, it's like, well, why do I need this other tool?
I suppose it's I suppose it's historical, isn't it? Traditionally, you know, the accounting systems were, you know, presumably one of the first pieces of software to be written.
This is a $1 billion idea coming up right here, I think.
And this is, you know what, Scott, this is the same question as, you know, why are there bicycles and cars? They kind of, they do the same thing, right? I mean, a bicycle and a car will both get you from A to B, maybe one slightly slower than the other. But, you know, accounting tools are designed to do accounting stuff. Like Adam said, you know, your P&L and your balance sheet and your tax returns and all those kinds of things. And, although a PSA tool is a business management platform and allows you to kind of do all of that, it stops at the billing, because really what it does is it says, it's going to generate the invoice, and then it's going to just take that invoice and push it into the accounting tool. And then at that point, it's then for the accounting tool that kind of takes over and does all of that thing. When you think about it, I mean, a PSA tool has everything, right from the beginning, from sales stage all the way through. But none of them in any PSA tool is, they're not the best of breed on each individual thing, right? There's millions of CRMs out there that are better than a CRM that you get within the PSA tool. There's, a million project management tools that are better than what you get in the PSA tool. But what they do give you is the ability to kind of say, well, if you don't have any of those tools, you can absolutely use them in the PSA tool to get to a certain point, and then start to do everything else in your finance tool. The other reason why, and actually, I think it's a good thing to actually still have an accounting tool, because most PSA tools are going to charge you per user, right? Which means if you then had an accounting tool built into that, you would then have to pay for your accountant. If you were using an accountant or a company like Adam, you'd then have to pay for them to be able to log in and actually do that kind of stuff. Yeah. So what I always suggest to people to do is do the invoicing, push it into your accounting tool, and then go, okay, it's now over to my accountant, and they can do whatever they do.
And Scott, actually, there are tools out there that do try and do everything. All the big tools like the PeopleSofts and the Barnes and all those huge ERP systems.
Enterprise
which
stuff.
which don't actually translate down to the SME IT business. They're too expensive, too big, too clumsy.
That was definitely a left field question, and
well, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because that question is really, do you try and get one system to rule them all, or do you have best of breed and have lots of different systems?
The reason I'm bringing it up is because I am seeing a move to that in other areas from an MSP perspective. So you're getting a lot of these CRMs that are now including like the quoting element, and it's pulling the data in from the vendor right directly into the quote. And so it's just like a natural progression. That was why the question was there. Now, before we hit record, we were kind of discussing what we were going to be talking about, and that was when you should be using the PSA and when you should be using the ledger. We've covered like, the reasons from a PSA perspective on, tracking the cost of your engineers and things like that. And that's probably not something you'd be doing in your ledger. Is that right?
Well, you're getting that information at a top level.
Yeah.
So your PAY information is coming in, and depending on how you structure your nominals on your chart of accounts, you can subdivide those according to projects, professional services, time-based services, sales, marketing, overheads, etc. So at a bare minimum, you should be structuring your labor into revenue earning people and overhead people, so you can start to measure gross margins properly. But if you want to start looking at efficiencies of projects and things like that, then you can the project team, you can subdivide again. But maybe at that point, maybe the question is actually, is the PSA the better tool to start looking at those margins and efficiencies? And so, absolutely, I'm just a firm believer of simplicity, not overcomplicating, for the sake of it. And actually, if it's easier to use your PSA tool to pull this information out, then do that. So for me, it's definitely a combination of the two, and using some benchmarking software appropriately, or some benchmarking tools, using some trending tools and analysis tools to start to pull some of this data out. And I think there is opportunity to improve that, and again, it's something we're working on. But you can get plenty of information if you structure your chart of accounts and your nominals correctly. You can get plenty of information out of your QuickBooks or your Xero. That's going to tell you some of the story. You can pull that into a dashboard tool, and then you can go to work on a lot of the variables that are in your PSA. And then I think where it really comes to life is when you can start to pull both of those sets of data together. So, you know, well, there's various things you can look at, but once you can start pulling in, you know, the number of seats that you might have into your PSA, you know, you're looking at revenue per seat, you're looking at billable hours utilization, all sorts of things like that, which I'm sure Chris can talk more about.
Mm. Yeah, and I mean, all that information, like you say, is going to be in the PSA tool. And I would agree with you, Adam, is I would kind of start that, you know, the cost of engineers, you know, billable resources, all that kind of stuff. I would be putting that into the PSA tool, because you're also going to be able to then see, you know, how much time has been done against tickets, how much time has been done against the contract, and look at that profitability information directly from the PSA tool. So the way I do it, and the way a lot of the MSPs do it, is kind of get that profitability information about, you know, how much engineers have cost, how much the contract is costing, how much that labor against the contract is costing, all that kind of stuff. That information is reported on from, you know, from the PSA tool itself, and it has all of those reports built in, you know, and on most of them, well, most of them have a really good reporting capability. Some of them have, you know, really good kind of business intelligence reporting dashboards and graphs and all these kind of things that you can easily pull out you know, a profitability dashboard to see, you know, how much does the labor cost me, you know, how much have I made on products and services, and then those can actually also then be aligned into the nominal code. So when you bring that stuff through into, you know, into QuickBooks or Xero or whatever accounting tool you're using, you can bring all of that stuff in and align it into the correct place within the nominals in the accounting tool.
And I would say, you know, my own experience on this was it wasn't actually that easy. These are complex tools. There's a lot of data. There's a lot of moving parts. It took us years, I would say, actually, ultimately, to start getting accurate, meaningful data out of our system, and we could have done it a lot quicker than that. But I think it's, I think there actually is quite a lot to it. You know, making sure you have got your, you know, your service catalog set up correctly. You've got your agreement set up correctly. You've got your engineer costs in there properly. You've got your vendor pricing integration set up properly for agreements. You know, there's probably other stuff as well. That you've got to have your chart of accounts set up correctly, and then that aligned properly with your PSA. So there's quite a few moving parts you've got to get right, and then you can start to actually pull out a lot of that information.
Yeah, you know, Adam, it would actually be really nice if there was any consultants out there that could actually help with that.
Do you know anybody, Chris?
I have no idea if there's any PSA consultants that can actually help you get it set up properly quicker than a year, right? Because that's exactly what it is a lot of people don't do this because it's just too hard, or they don't know where to go, or what have you. So
Yeah.
you know, kind of finding the resources to be able to help you to get that stuff set up as quick as possible and align that into your PSA tool. So
is it something that comes with maturity of the MSP? Do you find that's, you know, you mentioned, Adam, that it's something that it took you years to get to, and Chris, you know, because you're setting this up for people. You know,
well, yeah, I mean, you hear stories out there of well, there's a lot, you know, maturity. There's you only know what you know, right? So when you are low maturity, you don't really know you're low maturity, and I suppose that's the challenge, isn't it? So over time you build that maturity, and then over time you start to learn what good looks like, and you start to learn that you need to have a handle on your numbers, and then you start to make better decisions. And sorry, go.
I was going to say, if I can interject, there's actually I think there's a big reason why it takes so long for a lot of MSPs to get that information in. And that is, you know, what I always bang the drum about in the industry is I think a lot of people get a PSA tool for the wrong reasons, right? So they buy it as a service desk tool and don't realize that actually you can do all this finance stuff in it and never get it set up, because they just get to a point where it's like, well, you know, we need a ticketing system. So we're going to do tickets. We're going to do all these cool things. And then realize actually, you know, a few years in the business that actually now they need to start looking at profitability information. But they so they've used it specifically as a service delivery tool.
Agreed.
And that's fundamentally the reason why a lot of MSPs take so long to actually get that stuff in there, purely because they don't look at it with the mindset right in the beginning of, okay, I need a PSA tool that's going to help me with everything in my business. And right from the off, I want to start getting all of this information in so I can start reporting on profitability from day one. And so I think that's fundamentally a reason why it takes so long.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And most MSP owners are engineers, so they're naturally drawn to the service delivery element of this. That's their sort of comfort zone. They're focused on pushing this work out, and they're making some profit at the end of the year. Their accountant, 18 months later or 10 months later tells them they've made some profit, and so they're like, okay, I'm fine, and I think that's where there's a big gulf here. There's so much more that can be done to then raise the overall performance of that business and of course the profits as well, just by starting to really drill down and start to look at some of these numbers.
And actually, in saying that earlier on about using it as a service delivery tool, I think we should probably, for those MSPs that probably don't know what a PSA tool is, I should probably explain kind of what it is, right? And it's more than just a service delivery tool, right? It does everything in your business. I actually don't like the word PSA. I normally call it a business management platform, because pretty much that's what it is. It's a platform that's going to manage your entire business. So it's going to do, all of your sales, your opportunity management, all of that kind of stuff, your contract management, billing, invoicing, all that kind of stuff, as well as service delivery. And when I work with customers to help them get the product set up, I actually normally leave service delivery right until the end, because the most important thing getting into your PSA tool is exactly what you talked about, the costs of, of the licenses, the cost of the engineers.
Think about the money first. Think about why
exactly
the business.
Think about the money first. Exactly. That is the reason you're in business, right? Is to make money. Sure, you've obviously got to keep your customers happy, and there is a service delivery element of that, but that's not the key focus of a PSA tool, in my opinion. So I always start right at the beginning and kind of go, okay, let's look at putting in the costs and all of these kind of things, and then we focus on sales and opportunities, and we leave service delivery right until the end. So I think that's what a PSA tool is. It's that platform that manages your whole business, right the way through from kind of, when you very first talk to that first prospect, you meet them at a show or whatever, right up until, for you to manage their entire kind of life cycle of that client until they are no longer a client, if that ever happens.
That makes a lot of sense. And then we've got the other side of this, which is from an acquisition perspective, making your business more sellable. Do you find that it's maybe more of a question for Adam, I'm not sure, but you obviously have to have things in order, and there's a whole due diligence perspective. But there's almost like another level there, is that it's in your PSA as well. It's almost like another little layer of transparency in the business for someone that's potentially looking to, buy it.
So I can talk firsthand, having sold my business not too long ago.
Mm-hmm.
So that really interesting experience. Only went through it once, learned so many lessons and know how to do it better the second time. But the due diligence piece is a huge piece. Everyone I've spoken to who also has recently sold their business, agrees with that, and a fascinating experience. And we were bombarded with requests for all sorts of data, and we were frankly pulling it out wherever we could. So obviously a lot of it was out of zero, pulling together a lot of the P&L and balance sheets reports from out of that. But then back to the PSA, absolutely same thing, going into the reporting capacity of that, pulling out gross margin reports on a client by client basis. And what was interesting actually is we, I can't quite remember, but I think we changed our configuration of our PSA about 18 months before we sold. And hence a lot of the data was only 18 months old, actually. And so that was a situation where we couldn't do any better. You know, that was the only data we had. Yeah. And effectively the buyer just had to put up with that. So there is a learning point here that absolutely, if you can, you know, if you're gearing your business up to sell, you know, start thinking about how you know, getting your ducks in a row with regard to your reporting and your profitability on a client by client basis, your gross margins, you know, understanding how you can get hold of that data, because that will augur well in terms of that sales process, and being able to present to a potential buyer that you have all this information, you know, that you've got that higher level of maturity thinking. You know, that would certainly, and they'll ask for some initial reports. So if you're able to get those initial reports out to them, you know, really quickly, and they're high quality, then that will certainly help in your negotiations, as opposed to, oh, I've no idea to get that. You know, you're fishing around and you're trying to, you know, you're coming back with all sorts of rubbish. You know, I think that it's all about presenting your business in the right light. Yeah.
Mm.
Excellent.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, nothing to add to that. I fully agree with what Adam said.
Okay, so I guess the next question is, what questions have I missed here in this conversation? I don't want to keep it going on too long, because I know everyone's, you know, got their lunch to have.
I have a question. I have a question for you, Chris, and I probably know the answer, but I'm going to ask it. Should you be invoicing directly from your PSA or from your ledger?
Oh, I love that question. That's one of my favorite questions of all. My answer to that is it depends. So
it depends which one gets paid sooner. Yeah.
Yeah. No. Well, no. I say that you should really bill directly from your accounting tool.
Okay.
But when I say bill directly from your accounting tool, I mean generate the invoice in the PSA and then push that through into your accounting tool and send that invoice. The reason for that being is you've got to get it into your accounting tool at some point anyway, right? So yeah, at some point it's got to get into QuickBooks, it's got to get into Xero. So you might as well get it in there right in the beginning and then send it to your customer. Your customers are also used to getting invoices from that accounting tool anyway. The format and the look and feel of the invoice out of the PSA tool is going to be completely different to what you have in your accounting tool. So I always say generate it out of out of the accounting, out of the PSA tool, and then push that into the accounting tool. The only time I would really send it directly from, from the PSA tool is if for whatever reason you don't have some kind of accounting tool. Maybe you're just generating invoices and, you're using, which I hope isn't happening in the MSP industry, but maybe you're using Excel or you're using some other kind of mechanism to work out your P&L and all that kind of stuff, then you might want to send it from your PSA tool at that point. And also if you were using the client portal that was built into the PSA tool, that allows your users to log in and actually view their invoices as well. And at that point, they're going to be viewing the PSA invoice, and then it is going to be different from the accounting tool. But the way I do it and the way I recommend to all my clients to do it is generate it in the PSA, push it through to the accounting tool, and then send it from the accounting tool.
So we agree. So that's an interesting and actually, in an ideal world, it'd be great to invoice from the PSA, but my view is that there's always going to be errors creeping in. There's always going to be mistakes, etc. And yes, you can issue credits and what have you in your PSA, but ultimately your compliance, your end of year accounts, is going to be driven from your ledger. That's what you're sending to your accountant. That's the only version of truth you have.
Yeah.
And so for me, that's what you have to rely on 100% from a compliance perspective. You want your PSA matching that as close as you possibly can, but the likelihood is there's going to be some things that get missed. Yeah. And I think, ultimately, therefore, absolutely do what Chris has just said, sync it through, get it as right as you can, but ultimately the arbiter of truth is your ledger and invoice from that.
And actually saying what I said earlier on about, an extra license, if you sent it from your PSA tool, even if you got it into your, well, if you send it directly from your PSA tool, what that would mean is your accountant would have to log into your PSA tool to look at the invoices, to see what invoices you've sent, what credits you've sent, all those kind of things. So getting it into your accounting tool and sending it from there, it just, like you say, it's all in one place. Your accountant can log into your accounting tool. It's all there. Everything's there. No one has to look at anything inside the PSA necessarily. And you know, also when you send it straight away from a PSA tool, you need to wait for the sync to happen into the accounting tool in order for it to match invoice numbers. So if you sent it now and then pushed it later into your accounting tool, you're going to have an invoice number in Autotask or in ConnectWise or any of the PSA tools that are going to be different from the invoice number in the accounting tool until the sync happens. Normally it's instantaneous, but I have seen it happen before where the invoice goes out, it has a slightly different number on it, and only when the sync happens, it then updates and writes that invoice number in. So yeah, so don't do it. As far as I'm concerned, just do the billing through the PSA tool and then send it from whatever accounting tool you use, and send it in the normal way.
Cool.
Okay, last question. This is one for you both. I'll start with you, Chris. What's the single biggest mistake you see in the majority of your clients coming to you when they're, you know, when you're helping them with their PSA system?
The single biggest mistake, there's thousands.
Thing that drives you up the wall the most.
Yeah, well, most of it is what I alluded to earlier on, is I think when somebody buys a PSA tool as a service delivery tool, because, you know, they will buy it and say, I need a service desk tool. And because, you know, I'm one of these people where I think our entire industry is very much based on me too, right? It's like, well, everyone else is using a PSA tool, therefore I need to use one, without actually thinking why you need to use a PSA tool and what it's going to do for your business. So, you know, everyone's saying, oh yeah, I use it to create tickets for my customers, and the whole service delivery side is great. And the whole industry talks about a PSA tool as a service delivery tool. So I think the biggest mistake people make is they buy it for the wrong reasons. And they also, you know, buy a PSA tool that everyone else is using just because everyone buys a particular brand of PSA tool. The entire industry decides that's the same tool they're going to use, rather than saying what is right for my business and what tool is going to work for me. And, you know, so those are, I guess, my big bugbears when people come to me is those sorts of, you know, mistakes, I guess, or decisions that people make right in the beginning.
Good to know. Okay, Adam, same question to you. What's the biggest thing that drives you up the wall?
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure it's driving me up the wall. And
what's the biggest mistake you see?
Yeah, or not necessarily mistake, but I think it's probably the. I mean, the sort of premise of what we're offering here is that there's so much an owner can do once they start to understand the numbers, and it starts with getting the basic, accurate books in place, timely month-end procedures. And then starting to, you know, on a standardized chart of accounts, and then starting to understand the trends, understand the margins, get into some of the detail on which products and which services are profitable and which aren't, which clients are profitable, which aren't, you know, and starting to understand some of these ratios. Because once you do, then you absolutely can start really honing into what's important. What are the priorities? You know, and how do you start pricing things? How do you start deciding whether you can afford that next engineer or not, or where that problem is? You know, is the problem somewhere else? You don't actually need another engineer. And you can't do any of that unless you start with the bedrock of your data, your finance data, your PSA data. And I think that's what we see our mission as here. It's really that whole journey of growing alongside our clients, building that bedrock of the foundation of the data, the bookkeeping, educating our clients around how to use that data, how to start to understand it, and how to make better decisions, which will ultimately just drive the gross margin and then the profit, and ultimately, of course, the exit value. And that's just a huge piece here. And you know, that's what we're looking to do. And it's just, I guess, opening our clients' eyes to that thinking, and how actually just with a few dials, twisted here, 3 or 4 dials twisted, do you know what, they're all going to come together, and before you know it, your business is worth 2 million, not 1 million.
Yeah, I'd love to know more about those dials. Okay, excellent, guys. How can our viewers or our listeners get in touch with you for more info and help?
Shall I go first? Well,
Go for it.
yeah. So on all the usuals, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook.
Just Google your name,
Facebook.
Chris.
Just Google my name. I'm up in lights. In fact, if you go onto YouTube, I think Scott very nicely put me on your YouTube channel, Scott,
Yep.
as the Autotask guide. And I think if you type Autotask in YouTube, I pretty much come up as the first hit. But otherwise, sandelaconsulting.com, or also on my book website, which I'm just going to do a shameless plug for now, which is psaprofitability.com, where you can go buy the book from there, or Amazon. So yeah, I'm everywhere. You'll find me.
Excellent. Good
Yeah,
stuff.
and so not as complex as Chris. Adam at MSPFinanceteam.com. We also have a podcast coming online, or just give us a call. But great to be on the call today, Scott.
Yeah,
Thanks
for your time. And hey, folks, if you want to find out more about all of this, PSAs, finance services for MSPs, you can look at the whole market over at MSP-navigator.com. See you in the next episode. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.